The Galactic Council's emergency session was called at 0347 hours, Galactic Standard Time, on what would later be remembered as the most important Tuesday in interstellar history. Representatives from 347 different species were roused from their sleep cycles, meditation periods, or energy absorption phases by emergency broadcasts that used priority codes reserved for galaxy-threatening catastrophes. The emergency wasn't an invasion, a plague, or a cosmic disaster. It was 3 words that had never been heard in galactic politics before, transmitted simultaneously from every human colony. Station and ship in known space, hold my beer. Within 6 hours, those 3 words would fundamentally change how every species in the galaxy understood human psychology, human capabilities, and the terrifying implications of human recreational activities. Within 12 hours, the phrase "hold my beer" would become the most feared sentence in 17 languages. And within 24 hours, the galaxy would establish new safety protocols, emergency response procedures, and diplomatic immunity clauses specifically designed to prevent humans from ever saying those words again. But to understand how 3 simple words could trigger the largest galactic crisis since the Dog Wars, you need to understand what happened. On terra firma, the human agricultural colony where it all began. Terra firma was the kind of world that made humans nostalgic for Earth. Rolling hills covered in golden wheat, vast orchards of fruit trees, clear blue skies with just the right amount of clouds, and gravity that was exactly 1 standard G. The colony had been established 50 years earlier as part of humanity's contribution to the Galactic Food Security Initiative, and it had become one of the most productive agricultural worlds in known space. The colony's success was due in large part to its human settlers' characteristic approach to farming. They didn't just grow crops, they innovated constantly, experimented relentlessly, and refused to accept that anything was impossible until they had personally tried and failed at least 3 times. Terra firma's agricultural yields were 400% higher than the galactic standard. Their crops were more nutritious than anything grown on other worlds, and they had somehow managed to make farming both more efficient and more environmentally sustainable than anyone thought possible. The key to terra firma's success was its head agricultural engineer, Dr. Jake Mac McReynolds, a 3rd-generation farmer from Texas who had somehow earned advanced degrees in xenobotany, atmospheric engineering, and applied physics while never losing his essential character as a man who believed that any problem could be solved with enough ingenuity, determination, and willingness to try things that more sensible people would consider obviously impossible. Mac was known throughout the colony for his innovative solutions to agricultural challenges. When the local soil proved too acidic for Earth crops, Mac had genetically modified Earth bacteria to neutralize the acidity while simultaneously improving soil nutrition. When local weather patterns threatened to destroy entire harvests, Mac had developed atmospheric manipulation techniques that could redirect storm systems with pinpoint accuracy. When local wildlife began eating the crops, Mac had created a symbiotic ecosystem where the wildlife actually helped protect and maintain the agricultural areas while receiving all the nutrition they needed. Each of these innovations had required Mac to ignore the conventional wisdom of agricultural science, environmental engineering, and common sense. But Mac operated according to a different philosophy, one that was fundamentally human in its optimism and its refusal to accept limitations. If something seemed impossible, that just meant nobody had figured out how to do it yet. This philosophy had served Mac well throughout his career on terra firma. It had also made him something of a legend among the colony's human population, who had come to view Mac's latest project with the same anticipation that other cultures reserved for major Sporting events or religious festivals. The project that would change galactic history began as a response to what seemed like a minor agricultural challenge. Terra Firma's agricultural success had attracted the attention of the Zephyrian Crystal Growers Consortium, a group of crystalline beings who wanted to establish agricultural partnerships with human colonies to improve food production on their homeworlds. The Zephyrians were ideal partners for agricultural collaboration. Their crystalline structure allowed them to directly interface with soil mineral content. Their harmonic abilities could influence plant growth patterns, and their long lifespans gave them perspectives on agricultural sustainability that complemented human innovation perfectly. But there was one problem. Zephyrian homeworlds had atmospheric conditions that were toxic to most Earth-based crops. The atmosphere contained high concentrations of crystalline particles that interfered with plant cellular processes, electromagnetic fields that disrupted normal photosynthesis, and harmonic resonances that could shatter plant cell walls if not carefully managed. Previous attempts to grow Earth crops on Zephyrian worlds had failed completely. The plants either died within days of exposure to the atmosphere or survived but produced yields so low that the effort was economically pointless. The galactic agricultural community had concluded that Earth-based agriculture was simply incompatible with Zephyrian atmospheric conditions. Mac disagreed. "They're not incompatible," Mac told Dr. Sarah Chun, Terra Firma's diplomatic liaison, during the initial planning meeting with the Zephyrian representatives. "They're just challenging. There's a difference." Dr. Chun, who had worked with Mac long enough to recognize the warning signs of an impending Mac project, tried to steer the conversation toward more conventional approaches. "Mac, the atmospheric conditions on Zephyrian worlds are fundamentally hostile to carbon-based plant life. Multiple studies have confirmed that Earth crops cannot survive in those environments." "Using conventional agricultural techniques," Mac corrected. "But we're not conventional, are we?" The Zephyrian representatives, Crystal Singer Veltara and Harmony Keeper Zender, watched this exchange with growing fascination. They had heard about human agricultural innovation, but they had never witnessed the peculiar form of optimism that drove it. Dr. McReynolds, Crystal Singer Veltara said, her harmonic voice creating pleasant resonances in the meeting rooms. "Atmosphere. Our atmospheric conditions include crystalline particle concentrations that are lethal to carbon-based cellular structures. The electromagnetic fields interfere with normal biological processes. The harmonic resonances can literally vibrate plant matter apart at the molecular level. These are not challenges to be overcome through innovation. These are fundamental incompatibilities." Mac leaned back in his chair and grinned, an expression that Dr. Chen had learned to fear above all others. It was the grin that Mac wore when he was about to propose something that would either revolutionize agricultural science or require emergency evacuation procedures. "Crystal Singer Veltara," Mac said, "have you ever heard the phrase, 'hold my beer'?" The Zephyrian representatives consulted their translation matrices, but the phrase didn't translate properly into their harmonic language. The literal translation came out as something like, "temporarily custody my fermented grain beverage," which made no sense in the context of agricultural planning. "It's a human expression," Dr. Chen explained, her voice taking on the carefully neutral tone she used when she was trying to prevent Mac from doing something spectacularly dangerous. "It means, well, it's what humans say when they're about to attempt something that other people think is impossible or inadvisable. More specifically," Mac added, still grinning, "it's what we say when we're about to prove that something everyone thinks is impossible is actually just difficult." Harmony Keeper Zender's crystalline structure began resonating with frequencies that indicated confusion mixed with anticipation. Are you suggesting that you can develop agricultural techniques that will allow Earth crops to thrive in atmospheric conditions that have been scientifically proven to be lethal to carbon-based life? I'm not suggesting it, Mac replied. I'm going to do it. Dr. Chun, hold my beer. The problem with Mac's announcement was that he wasn't holding a beer. He was holding a cup of coffee, which he handed to Dr. Chun with the same casual confidence that had preceded every one of his previous impossible projects. Dr. Chun accepted the coffee cup with the resignation of someone who had learned that arguing with Mac when he was in this mood was like trying to argue with a force of nature. Mac. The Zephyrian atmospheric conditions are not just challenging. They're actively hostile to the kind of life we're trying to grow. That's what makes it interesting, Mac replied. If it was easy, someone would have done it already. What followed was 3 months of the most intensive agricultural research and development project in galactic history. Mac approached the problem with the characteristic human combination of scientific rigor and complete disregard for conventional limitations. If Zephyrian atmospheric conditions were hostile to normal plant life, then he would create plant life that wasn't normal. The first phase of the project involved creating what Mac called atmospheric interface plants, genetically modified Earth crops that could not only survive in Zephyrian atmospheric conditions, but actually use those conditions to enhance their growth. Instead of being damaged by crystalline particles, the plants would incorporate them into their cellular structure to create hybrid, organic crystalline tissues that were stronger and more efficient than normal plant matter. The genetic modifications required to achieve this were so complex that they pushed the boundaries of what was considered scientifically possible. Mac had to essentially create new forms of cellular biology that operated on principles that hadn't existed before. The plants he developed weren't just modified Earth crops. They were entirely new forms of life that combined the best characteristics of carbon-based and silicon-based organisms, but creating the plants was only the first challenge. The second challenge was developing agricultural techniques that could manage the interaction between Earth-style farming and Zephyrian environmental conditions. The electromagnetic fields that interfered with normal plant biology had to be redirected and managed. The harmonic resonances that could shatter cellular structures had to be tuned and controlled. The atmospheric chemistry had to be balanced to support both the modified plants and the Zephyrian partners who would be working with them. Mac attacked each of these challenges with the same enthusiasm he brought to all his projects. He developed electromagnetic field management systems that turned the hostile fields into beneficial energy sources for plant growth. He created harmonic resonance controllers that could tune atmospheric frequencies to enhance rather than damage cellular processes. He designed atmospheric processing systems that could maintain the delicate balance between human agricultural needs and Zephyrian environmental requirements. Each of these innovations required Mac to solve problems that the galactic scientific community had considered unsolvable. Each solution required him to ignore the conventional wisdom of multiple scientific disciplines and develop entirely new approaches based on principles that he was essentially inventing as he went along. The project attracted attention from across the galaxy. Agricultural scientists, atmospheric engineers, and xenobiologists from dozens of species came to terra firma to observe Mac's work. Most of them arrived expecting to document an interesting failure that would provide valuable data about the limits of agricultural innovation. Instead, they found themselves witnessing the development of technologies and techniques that challenged their fundamental understanding of what was possible. Dr. Kethfor, the renowned xenobiologist whose work on human psychology had been instrumental in understanding the aftermath of the Dog Wars, arrived at terra firma 6 weeks into the project. She had come to study the psychological factors that drove humans to attempt impossible projects, expecting to observe the cognitive mechanisms that allowed humans to maintain optimism in the face of inevitable failure. Instead, she found herself documenting the systematic dismantling of scientific impossibilities by a human who seemed genuinely surprised that anyone had ever considered the project difficult. "Dr. McReynolds," she asked during one of her interviews, "do you understand that what you are attempting violates several fundamental principles of xenobiology, atmospheric science, and agricultural engineering?" Mac paused in his work calibrating a harmonic resonance controller and looked at her with genuine confusion. "Which principles?" Dr. Kethver consulted her notes. "The principle that carbon-based and silicon-based biological systems are fundamentally incompatible. The principle that electromagnetic fields of the intensity found on Zephyrin worlds cannot be safely managed by biological organisms. The principle that harmonic resonances strong enough to affect atmospheric chemistry will destroy any cellular structures in their range." "Oh, those principles," Max said, returning to his calibration work. "Yeah, I figured those were more like guidelines than actual rules. I mean, they're based on what we knew before we tried to solve the problems, right? Once you solve the problems, you learn new things, and then the old principles don't apply anymore." Dr. Kethver stared at him in bewilderment. "Dr. McReynolds, those principles are based on thousands of years of scientific research by hundreds of species. They represent the accumulated knowledge of galactic civilization about the fundamental nature of biological and atmospheric systems." Mac nodded agreeably. "Right, and that's a great starting point. But starting points are for starting, not for stopping. Just because nobody's figured out how to do something yet doesn't mean it can't be done. It just means it's my turn to try." This conversation, recorded by Dr. Kethver and later analyzed by xenopsychologists across the galaxy, became one of the foundational documents in the study of human cognitive patterns. It revealed the psychological mechanism that drove humans to attempt projects that other species considered impossible. They simply didn't accept that impossibility was a permanent condition. But the conversation also revealed something else that would become crucial to understanding the events that followed. Mac wasn't attempting the impossible because he was reckless or ignorant of the risks. He was attempting it because his experience had taught him that most impossible things were just difficult things that nobody had figured out how to do yet. And Mac was very, very good at figuring out how to do difficult things. The breakthrough came in the project's 8th week, when Mac successfully grew the first Earth tomato in a controlled Zephyrian atmospheric environment. The tomato didn't just survive, it thrived. It grew faster than normal Earth tomatoes, produced higher yields, and had a nutritional content that was significantly superior to anything grown in normal atmospheric conditions. But the most remarkable thing about Mac's success wasn't the technical achievement. It was the way he reacted to it. "Well, that worked," Mac said, examining the thriving tomato plant with the same casual satisfaction that other people might express when successfully assembling furniture. "I guess we can start scaling up production, Dr." Chun, who had been monitoring the project with growing amazement and terror, tried to make Mac understand the magnitude of what he had accomplished. "Mac, you've just achieved something that the entire galactic scientific community said was impossible. You've created a new form of life that operates on biological principles that didn't exist before this project. You've developed technologies that solve problems that have been considered unsolvable for centuries." Mac nodded thoughtfully. "Yeah, it was pretty interesting. A lot more complicated than I expected, but most things are once you get into the details. The atmospheric interface genetics were the tricky part. Everything else was just engineering." "Just engineering?" Dr. Chun's voice rose an octave. "Mac, You've essentially rewritten the laws of atmospheric science, xenobiology, and agricultural engineering. You've created technologies that other species don't even have theoretical frameworks for understanding. Well, yeah, Mac agreed. That's usually what happens when you try to solve new problems. You have to develop new solutions, and new solutions require new technologies, and new technologies require new theoretical frameworks. It's pretty standard for any project that hasn't been done before. This conversation was overheard by Crystal Singer Veltara, who had been working with Mac throughout the project and had developed a deep appreciation for human problem-solving capabilities. But hearing Mac describe his revolutionary achievements as pretty standard triggered something in her crystalline psychology that was equivalent to existential shock. "Dr. McReynolds," she said, her harmonic voice carrying frequencies of bewilderment that resonated through the entire facility, "what you have accomplished in 8 weeks represents advances that my species' greatest scientists would have considered. The work of centuries, if they had considered it possible at all. How can you describe this as standard?" Mac paused in his examination of the tomato plant and looked at Crystal Singer Veltara with the patient expression he used when explaining obvious things to people who were having trouble understanding them. "Crystal Singer Veltara," he said, "this is just the first step. The atmospheric interface plants are just the foundation for what we're really going to do." "What you are really going to do?" Dr. Chen asked, her voice carrying the carefully controlled tone of someone who was beginning to suspect that she had fundamentally misunderstood the scope of Mac's project. Mac grinned, and Dr. Chen felt her heart sink as she recognized the expression that had preceded every one of Mac's most spectacular undertakings. "We're going to terraform a moon," Mac announced. "Crystal Singer Veltara, your people have been having trouble with atmospheric management on some of your colony worlds, right? The harmonic resonances get out of balance, the crystalline particle. Concentrations fluctuate and the electromagnetic fields become unstable." Crystal Singer Veltara's harmonic frequencies shifted to indicate confirmation mixed with growing apprehension. "Yes, those are ongoing challenges for our colonial expansion efforts. Our atmospheric management technologies are adequate for maintaining stable conditions, but they require constant attention and frequent recalibration." "Right," Mac said. "So instead of managing the atmosphere, we're going to grow it." The silence that followed Mac's announcement was so complete that the facility's atmospheric recycling system seemed deafeningly loud. Dr. Chen, Crystal Singer Veltara, and every other being in the facility stared at Mac as the implications of his words sank in. "Grow it?" Dr. Chen finally managed to ask. "Sure," Mac replied, as if he was discussing something as mundane as planting a vegetable garden. "The atmospheric interface plants don't just survive in Zephyrian atmospheric conditions. They actively modify those conditions to optimize their own growth. If we scale up the system and introduce the right mix of plant varieties, we can create biological atmospheric management systems that are self-regulating, self-maintaining, and continuously adaptive." He gestured toward the thriving tomato plant. "This little guy is already producing atmospheric modifications in a 10-meter radius around itself. Scale that up to planetary coverage, and you've got a living atmosphere that automatically maintains optimal conditions for both Zephyrian and human needs." Crystal Singer Veltara's harmonic frequencies reached levels that hadn't been recorded in her species' history. "Dr. McReynolds, you are describing biological terraforming on a planetary scale using organisms that you invented 8 weeks ago. The complexity of such a project would require coordination between atmospheric sciences, xenobiology, planetary engineering, and ecological design on a level that has never been attempted by any species in galactic history." "Yeah," Mac agreed. "It's going to be fun." The word fun triggered something in Dr. Chun's psychology that was equivalent to a fire alarm. In her experience, when Mac described a project as fun, it meant that he had already figured out how to do something that everyone else considered impossible, and was now looking forward to the practical challenges of implementation. Mac, she said carefully, when you say we're going to terraform a moon, what exactly do you mean? I mean, we're going to take Zephyrian Colony Moon 7, which has been having atmospheric stability problems for the last 50 years, and we're going to establish a planetary-scale biological atmospheric management system that will automatically maintain optimal conditions for both Zephyrian and human habitation, while producing agricultural yields that exceed anything currently achieved on any world in the galaxy. Mac paused, considering his words. And we're going to do it in 6 months, because Crystal Singer Veltara's people need a demonstration that the system works before they can commit to larger-scale implementation. The conversation that followed this announcement became legendary in diplomatic circles as the first recorded instance of an alien representative requesting emergency psychological support during a routine agricultural planning meeting. Crystal Singer Veltara's harmonic frequencies became so unstable that she required assistance from Harmony Keeper, Zender, to maintain basic communication capabilities. But the most significant aspect of the conversation was Mac's reaction to the aliens' distress. He seemed genuinely surprised that they found his proposal remarkable or concerning. Look, he said, I understand that this is a bigger project than most people are used to, but it's really just a scaling up of what we've already proven works. The atmospheric interface plants are already demonstrating planetary-scale atmospheric modification capabilities on a small scale. The technological frameworks are already developed and tested. The biological systems are already proven stable and self-regulating. He gestured toward the control systems he had developed for managing the test environment. All we have to do is coordinate the planetary installation, calibrate the biological systems for large-scale implementation, and monitor the results. It's ambitious, but it's not complicated. Dr. Chun found herself in the peculiar position of trying to explain to Mac why his proposal was terrifying to everyone who understood its implications. Mac, you're talking about biological terraforming using technologies that you invented 2 months ago. You're proposing to modify the entire atmospheric system of a world using organisms that have never been tested outside of laboratory conditions. You're suggesting a project that would represent the largest engineering undertaking in galactic history. Right, Mac agreed, but we're not doing it alone. We've got Crystal Singer Veltara's people providing atmospheric expertise and harmonic management. We've got the terra firma agricultural systems providing the biological and technological foundation. We've got the Galactic Terraforming Consortium providing logistical and engineering support. And we've got 6 months to make it work. He paused, grinning with the expression that Dr. Chun had learned meant that Mac was about to say something that would make everything else seem reasonable by comparison. Besides, Mac continued, if we can make this work, it'll prove the concept. For the next project. Next project? Dr. Chun asked, though she already suspected that she didn't want to know the answer. Well, if we can terraform a moon in 6 months, we should be able to terraform a planet in a year. And if we can terraform a planet in a year, we should be able to develop mobile terraforming systems that can establish habitable environments on any world in the galaxy. And if we can do that ... Mac's grin widened. We can start working on the really interesting projects. The implications of Mac's casual reference to really interesting projects sent Dr. Chun into a state of psychological shock that required immediate medical attention. But before the medical team could escort her to the facility's health center, She managed to ask one final question that would become crucial to understanding the events that followed. "Mac," she said, her voice weak but determined, "what would you consider a really interesting project?" Mac's answer was recorded by the facility's automatic documentation systems and later became one of the most widely analyzed statements in galactic history. "Well, there's no reason why terraforming has to be limited to making worlds habitable for existing forms of life. Once we've perfected the biological atmospheric management systems, we should be able to create entirely new types of environments that are optimized for whatever kinds of life we want to support. Custom atmospheres, tailored gravity, designed ecosystems." He paused, his expression taking on the distant look of someone contemplating possibilities that existed far beyond the boundaries of current understanding. "We could build worlds that are perfect for any species we choose. We could create environments that don't exist anywhere in nature. We could design planets that are specifically optimized for interspecies cooperation, or for scientific research, or for artistic expression, or for whatever purposes we can imagine." Mac's voice took on the tone of someone who was beginning to grasp the full scope of what he was proposing. "We could build a galaxy where every world is perfect for the beings who live there. We could eliminate the compromises and limitations that species have always had to accept. We could create a universe that's actively designed to support the flourishing of intelligent life." The recording of Mac's statement was immediately classified by the Terra Firma Colonial Administration and transmitted to the Galactic Council with priority codes reserved for potential threats to galactic stability. Within hours, representatives from dozens of species were demanding emergency briefings on what was being described as the Human Terraforming Project. But Mac was already moving forward with his plans, seemingly oblivious to the alarm his proposals were causing throughout galactic civilization. He began assembling the resources and personnel needed for the Zephyrian Moon Terraforming Project. With the same methodical efficiency he had brought to developing atmospheric interface plants, the team he assembled represented an unprecedented collaboration between human innovation and alien expertise. Crystal Singer Veltara and Harmony Keeper Zender provided Zephyrian atmospheric science and harmonic management capabilities. Dr. Sarah Kim, Terra Firma's head botanist, contributed expertise in large-scale ecological design. Engineers from the Mokari Biological Systems Consortium provided organic systems integration knowledge. The hegemony of advanced beings contributed planetary engineering and logistical coordination capabilities, but the driving force behind the project remained Mac's characteristic human optimism and refusal to accept limitations. While other species representatives approached the project with careful caution and extensive safety protocols, Mac approached it with the same enthusiasm. He had brought to growing tomatoes in impossible conditions. "It's really just gardening," he explained to the assembled project team during their first planning meeting. "We're planting a garden that happens to cover an entire moon, and we're using plants that happen to modify atmospheric chemistry, but the basic principles are the same as any agricultural project." Dr. Kethver, who had remained on terra firma to study the psychological factors driving Mac's project, found herself documenting the most extreme example of human cognitive patterns she had ever encountered. Mac wasn't minimizing the complexity of planetary terraforming because he was ignorant of the challenges involved. He was approaching it as a straightforward scaling up of proven techniques because that's how human problem-solving worked. Start with what you know works, figure out how to make it bigger, and solve whatever new problems emerge along the way. But the other species, representatives, were beginning to understand that they weren't just participating in an ambitious terraforming project. They were witnessing the emergence of capabilities that could fundamentally reshape galactic civilization. If humans could develop biological terraforming technologies in a matter of months, What else might they be capable of? The answer to that question became apparent when Mac casually mentioned during a project review meeting that he had been working on some side projects to optimize the terraforming process. Side projects? Asked Dr. Kim, her voice carrying the wary tone of someone who had learned to be cautious about Mac's casual remarks. Yeah, just some additional applications for the atmospheric interface technologies, Mac replied. I figured while we're developing the planetary scale systems, we might as well explore some of the other possibilities. He activated a holographic display that showed a series of technical diagrams that were so complex they required advanced degrees in multiple scientific disciplines to understand. I've been working on atmospheric interface plants that can function in vacuum conditions, which opens up possibilities for terraforming airless worlds. And I've developed some variants that can operate in extreme temperature environments, which means we could potentially terraform worlds that are much closer to or farther from their stars than previously considered habitable. The implications of Mac's side projects sent ripples of alarm through the project team. If he could develop plants that could terraform airless worlds or extreme temperature environments, then the number of worlds that could potentially be made habitable had just increased by several orders of magnitude, but Mac wasn't finished. I've also been experimenting with atmospheric interface plants that can modify gravity fields on a local scale, which could allow us to create habitable environments on worlds with non-standard gravity. And there are some interesting possibilities for plants that can generate or modify electromagnetic fields, which could give us much more precise control over planetary atmospheric and environmental conditions. Crystal Singer Veltara's harmonic frequencies reached levels that indicated she was approaching the limits of her ability to process new information. Dr. McReynolds, you are describing technologies that would allow humans to make any world in the galaxy habitable for any species. You are describing the ability to custom design planetary environments according to any specifications you choose. Right, Mac agreed. That's the point. Why should any species have to settle for worlds that are just barely habitable when we could create worlds that are perfectly optimized for whatever they need? Harmony Keeper Zender's crystalline structure began resonating with frequencies that the Zephyrian translation systems couldn't process. When the translation finally came through, it was a single word repeated multiple times. Impossible, impossible, impossible. Mac looked puzzled. Why is it impossible? We've already proven the basic technologies work. Scaling them up and adapting them for different environments is just engineering. Complicated engineering, sure, but nothing that can't be solved with enough time and effort. Dr. Kethfer, who had been recording the entire conversation for her research, realized that she was witnessing something that xenopsychology had no framework for understanding. Mac wasn't proposing impossible technologies because he was delusional or ignorant of the challenges involved. He was proposing them because his experience had taught him that technological limitations were temporary obstacles rather than permanent boundaries, but more importantly, Mac was proposing these technologies with the casual confidence of someone who had already figured out how to make them work. His side projects weren't theoretical explorations of future possibilities. They were practical development programs for technologies that he intended to implement. The realization that Mac wasn't just dreaming about impossible technologies, but actively developing them triggered emergency protocols throughout the galactic government system. Within hours of Dr. Kethfer's preliminary report, emergency sessions were being convened by every major governmental body in the galaxy. Galactic Council's emergency session was called to address what was being described as the human technology crisis. The concern wasn't that humans were developing dangerous weapons or threatening other species. The concern was that humans were developing capabilities that could make every other species Technology's obsolete overnight. If humans could terraform any world to any specifications, then the economic and political systems that had governed galactic civilization for millennia would become irrelevant. Species that had achieved power and prosperity through their control of habitable worlds would find their advantages eliminated. The careful balance of resources and capabilities that maintained galactic stability would be shattered. But the immediate concern was simpler and more urgent. Nobody knew what humans intended to do with these capabilities. The Galactic Council's first action was to send a diplomatic mission to terra firma to assess the situation and determine human intentions. The mission was led by Ambassador Zentok, whose species gift for understatement had made him one of the galaxy's most respected diplomats. Ambassador Zentok's meeting with Mac became one of the most important diplomatic encounters in galactic history, not because of any agreements reached or treaties signed, but because it revealed the fundamental difference between human and non-human approaches to technological capability. Dr. McReynolds, Ambassador Zentok began. The Galactic Council has some concerns about the scope and implications of your terraforming research. Mac nodded politely. Sure, I understand that large-scale technological development can raise questions about implementation and resource allocation. What specific concerns can I address for you? Ambassador Zentok consulted his notes, which covered several pages of carefully prepared diplomatic language designed to address the situation without causing unnecessary alarm. The Council is concerned about the potential applications of your atmospheric modification technologies, particularly in regard to their impact on existing planetary ownership and territorial agreements. Oh, I see the confusion, Max said, his expression clearing. We're not planning to modify any worlds that are currently inhabited or claimed by other species. The terraforming projects are focused on worlds that are currently uninhabitable or unclaimed. We're creating new habitable worlds, not taking existing ones. Ambassador Zentok felt a wave of relief, followed immediately by renewed concern as the implications of Mac's statement sank in. Dr. McReynolds, when you say creating new habitable worlds, are you referring to the Zephyrian Moon Project, or are you referring to a broader program of planetary modification? Mac's grin returned, and Ambassador Zentok experienced the same sinking feeling that Dr. Chun had learned to associate with that expression. Well, the Zephyrian Moon Project is just the proof of concept. Once we've demonstrated that the biological terraforming systems work on a planetary scale, we'll be able to implement them throughout the galaxy. Throughout the galaxy? Ambassador Zentok's gift for understatement was being severely tested. Right, Mac replied enthusiastically. There are thousands of worlds in the galaxy that are currently uninhabitable but could be terraformed, using biological atmospheric management systems. We could probably make most of them habitable within a few years, depending on how quickly we can scale up production and deployment of the atmospheric interface organisms. Ambassador Zentok's species didn't have facial expressions, but if they had, his would have been one of complete bewilderment. Dr. McReynolds, you are describing a program that would double or triple the number of habitable worlds in the galaxy within a matter of years. Actually, more like increase it by about 10 times, Mac corrected. Most species have been limited to worlds that are naturally compatible with their biology. But biological terraforming can create habitable environments for any species on almost any world. So we're not just adding new worlds. We're making existing worlds available to species that couldn't use them before. The conversation continued for several hours, with Ambassador Zentok trying to understand the scope of Mac's plans and Mac trying to explain why he didn't understand why anyone would consider his proposals remarkable or concerning. By the end of the meeting, Ambassador Zentok had concluded that humans represented a form of intelligence that operated according to principles that no other species in the galaxy had encountered before. The report that Ambassador Zentok filed with the Galactic Council became the foundation for what historians would later call the Great Recalibration of Galactic Expectations. The report's central conclusion was that humans didn't just have different capabilities than other species. They had different concepts of what capabilities were possible. Humans, Ambassador Zentok wrote, appear to approach technological development from the assumption that any problem can be solved if sufficient effort is applied to understanding and addressing the underlying challenges. They do not recognize the existence of permanent technological limitations, only temporary obstacles that require innovative solutions. The report went on to explain that this approach to problem solving had allowed humans to develop technologies that other species had never even attempted to create, because other species had assumed that such technologies were impossible. But more importantly, humans were developing these technologies without understanding that they were considered impossible, which meant they approached them as routine engineering challenges rather than revolutionary breakthroughs. Dr. McReynolds does not understand that planetary terraforming using biological atmospheric management systems represents a fundamental advancement in galactic technological capability. Ambassador Zentok concluded, from his perspective, he is simply scaling up agricultural techniques that he has already proven effective. He is not attempting to revolutionize galactic civilization. He is trying to solve practical problems using the tools and knowledge available to him. The Galactic Council's response to Ambassador Zentok's report was swift and unprecedented. For the first time in galactic history, a single species' technological development was classified as a potential threat to galactic stability, not because the technology was dangerous, but because it was too beneficial. If humans could terraform thousands of worlds within a few years, the resulting changes to galactic economics, politics, and social structure would be so profound that they could destabilize every existing governmental and social system in the galaxy. The careful balance of power and resources that had maintained galactic peace for centuries would be shattered by an abundance of habitable worlds that would make traditional territorial and resource conflicts obsolete. But the Council's most difficult challenge was figuring out how to address the situation. Humans weren't violating any laws or treaties. They weren't threatening other species or claiming territory that belonged to others. They were simply developing agricultural technologies that happened to have implications that extended far beyond agriculture. The problem was that Mac didn't seem to understand that his work had implications beyond agriculture. From his perspective, he was solving farming problems. The fact that his solutions could reshape galactic civilization was an incidental side effect that he hadn't really considered. This disconnect between human intentions and galactic implications led to what became known as the communication crisis. The Galactic Council needed to address the situation, but they couldn't figure out how to explain to humans why solving agricultural problems was a threat to galactic stability. The crisis deepened when Mac's preliminary work on the Zephyrian moon terraforming project began producing results that exceeded even his optimistic projections. The biological atmospheric management systems weren't just working. They were working better than anyone had dared to hope. The test installations on Zephyrian Colony Moon 7 had transformed a small section of the moon's surface from a barely habitable wasteland into a thriving ecosystem that supported both Zephyrian and human life with unprecedented comfort and productivity. The atmospheric interface plants had not only stabilized the moon's atmospheric chemistry, but had created environmental conditions that were superior to those found on most naturally habitable worlds. But the most remarkable aspect of the test installations was their rate of expansion. The biological systems were designed to be self-replicating and self-expanding, which meant that once they were established, they spread across the moon's surface without requiring additional human intervention. Within 2 months of the initial installation, the biological atmospheric management systems had covered nearly a quarter of the moon's surface. Within 4 months, they had covered half the moon. At the current rate of expansion, the entire moon would be terraformed within 6 months, exactly as Mack had predicted. The success of the Zephyrian Moon project triggered panic throughout the galactic government system. If Mack could terraform an entire moon in 6 months using self-replicating biological systems, then his casual references to terraforming thousands of worlds suddenly seemed less like optimistic projections and more like inevitable outcomes. The panic intensified when intelligence reports revealed that Mack hadn't been idle during the Zephyrian Moon project. He had been using the project as a testing ground for new technologies that were even more ambitious than his original atmospheric interface plans. The latest reports from terra firma described Mack's development of what he called planetary engineering. Organisms' biological systems that could modify not just atmospheric conditions but planetary geology, hydrology, and even gravitational fields. These organisms could reshape entire worlds according to any specifications, creating custom-designed planets that were optimized for whatever purposes their designers chose. But perhaps most alarming was Mack's casual mention during a routine project update that he had been working on some ideas for interplanetary applications of his biological engineering technologies. When pressed for details about these interplanetary applications, Mack had explained that there was no reason why biological engineering had to be limited to individual planets. With the right modifications, biological systems could operate in the vacuum of space, creating habitable environments in asteroid belts around space stations or even in the empty space between stars. You could have entire civilizations that exist in space rather than on planets. Mack had explained with the same enthusiasm he brought to all his projects. Mobile habitats that could travel between star systems, custom-designed environments that could support any form of life, space-based ecosystems that could process raw materials from asteroids and comets. The implications of Mack's interplanetary application sent shockwaves through the galactic intelligence community. If humans could create habitable environments in space using self-replicating biological systems, then traditional concepts of territorial boundaries, resource limitations, and strategic positions would become meaningless. But the true crisis began when Mack made an offhand comment during a project review meeting that revealed the ultimate scope of his ambitions. "The thing is," Mack said, "once you understand the basic principles of biological engineering, there's really no limit to what you can do. You're not just modifying existing environments. You're designing new forms of reality. You could create environments that don't exist anywhere in nature, that are specifically optimized for whatever purposes you can imagine." Dr. Chun, who had recovered from her earlier psychological shock and returned to her role as diplomatic liaison, asked the question that everyone was thinking, "Mack, what's the ultimate goal of all this? What are you trying to achieve?" Mack's answer would be recorded and analyzed by xenopsychologists for generations. "I want to build a universe where every intelligent being can live in an environment that's perfect for them. Not just habitable, but perfect. Custom-designed worlds that are optimized for their biology, their psychology, their culture, their dreams." He paused, his expression taking on the distant look of someone contemplating possibilities that existed far beyond current understanding. "I want to create a galaxy where the only limitations on what's possible are the limits of imagination, where any species can have any kind of world they want, where any individual can live in an environment that maximizes their potential for happiness and achievement. Mac's vision was simultaneously the most beautiful and most terrifying thing that galactic civilization had ever encountered. Beautiful because it promised an end to the compromises and limitations that had always constrained intelligent life. Terrifying because it represented changes so profound that they would make the current structure of galactic civilization completely obsolete. The realization that Mac wasn't just developing new technologies, but was actively working toward the complete transformation of galactic reality triggered the emergency session that would change everything. The Galactic Council's emergency session was unlike anything in the history of interstellar diplomacy. Representatives from every major species gathered to address a threat that couldn't be fought, negotiated with, or contained through traditional means. The threat was progress itself, progress so rapid and profound that it could destroy galactic civilization by making it unnecessary. The session began with a presentation by Dr. Kethver, whose research on human psychology had made her the galaxy's leading expert on understanding human motivations and capabilities. Honored representatives, Dr. Kethver began, we face a situation that has no precedent in galactic history. Humanity has developed capabilities that could fundamentally transform the nature of existence for every intelligent species in the galaxy. But more importantly, they have developed these capabilities without understanding their implications for galactic civilization. She activated a holographic display that showed the current rate of expansion of Mac's biological terraforming systems. Dr. McReynolds' technologies are not just theoretical possibilities. They are practical realities that are already reshaping entire worlds. At the current rate of development and deployment, humans could terraform every uninhabitable world in the galaxy within a decade. The implications of Dr. Kethver's presentation sent murmurs of alarm through the assembly. If humans could create thousands of new habitable worlds within a decade, then the economic and political systems that governed galactic civilization would become irrelevant overnight. But Dr. Kethver's next revelation was even more disturbing. The terraforming technologies represent only the beginning of human capabilities. Dr. McReynolds has indicated that he considers planetary modification to be a starting point for what he calls universal engineering, the design and creation of custom realities optimized for any conceivable purpose. The silence that followed this statement was so complete that the chamber's life support system seemed deafeningly loud. Representatives from hundreds of species struggled to process the implications of what they had just heard. Ambassador Zentok was the first to speak. Dr. Kethver, are you suggesting that humans intend to redesign the entire universe according to their preferences? Not according to their preferences, Dr. Kethver clarified. According to everyone's preferences, Dr. McReynolds' stated goal is to create environments that are perfectly optimized for every intelligent species in the galaxy. He genuinely believes that this would be beneficial for everyone. The distinction between humans imposing their will on the galaxy and humans trying to optimize the galaxy for everyone was crucial, but it didn't make the situation less alarming. If anything, it made it more difficult to address because humans weren't acting out of malice or self-interest, but out of a sincere desire to help. Crystal Singer Veltara, who had worked directly with Mac throughout the terraforming project, requested permission to address the council. Her harmonic voice created frequencies that conveyed both deep respect and profound concern. Honored representatives, she began, I have observed Dr. McReynolds' work firsthand, and I must report that his capabilities exceed even Dr. Kethver. Analysis suggests Dr. McReynolds does not approach technological development as other species do. He does not recognize the existence of permanent limitations or impossible goals. She paused, her crystalline structure resonating with frequencies That indicated she was struggling to find words for concepts that didn't exist in most galactic languages. Dr. McReynolds operates according to a principle that I can only describe as applied impossibility. When he encounters a problem that appears unsolvable, he assumes that the apparent impossibility is due to insufficient understanding rather than fundamental limitations. He then develops new understanding, new technologies, and new approaches until the impossible becomes routine. Crystal Singer Veltara's testimony was followed by reports from other beings who had worked with humans on various projects. Each report painted the same picture. Humans approach technological challenges as temporary obstacles rather than permanent boundaries, and they possess the combination of creativity, persistence, and optimism necessary to turn their approaches into practical results. But the most disturbing report came from the hegemony of Advanced Beings Intelligence Service, which had been monitoring human technological development for potential military applications. The human's biological engineering capabilities have military implications that extend far beyond planetary terraforming, reported Strategic Intelligence Coordinator Talvex. If they can create biological systems that modify planetary environments, they can create biological systems that could neutralize any known defensive technology. The coordinator activated a display that showed theoretical military applications of Max biological engineering technologies. Biological systems that could disable enemy ship life support, organisms that could consume enemy weapons and equipment, atmospheric modification systems that could make enemy bases uninhabitable. The potential applications are limited only by human imagination. The military implications of human biological engineering sent a new wave of alarm through the Council. If humans could develop biological weapons that operated on the same principles as their terraforming technologies, then no existing defensive system would be adequate to protect against them. But the most chilling aspect of the intelligence report was its conclusion: we have found no evidence that humans are developing these technologies for military purposes. They appear to be developing them purely for beneficial applications without recognizing their potential for warfare. The realization that humans were accidentally developing the most powerful weapons in galactic history while trying to solve agricultural problems created a form of existential anxiety that most species had never experienced. It was one thing to face a deliberate military threat. It was something else entirely to face a species that could destroy galactic civilization while trying to help. The Council's debate continued for hours, with representatives struggling to find a response to a situation that defied every category of threat assessment that galactic civilization had ever developed. Finally, Elder Statesman Culver of the Ancient Order raised the question that everyone was thinking, but no one wanted to ask. What do the humans want? The question seemed simple, but it was actually the most complex issue the Council faced. Based on all available evidence, humans wanted to help. They wanted to solve problems, improve conditions, and create opportunities for all intelligent life to flourish. These were admirable goals that aligned with the fundamental values of galactic civilization. The problem was that humans' methods for achieving these goals could destroy everything that galactic civilization had built over millennia of careful development and cooperation. Dr. Kethfer provided the answer that everyone feared. The humans want to succeed. They want to solve every problem they encounter, overcome every limitation they face, and create the best possible outcomes for everyone involved. They are not motivated by conquest, domination, or self-interest. They are motivated by an irrepressible optimism and a fundamental belief that any challenge can be overcome with sufficient effort and creativity. She paused, allowing the implications of her words to sink in. The humans are not threatening galactic civilization intentionally. They are threatening it through the natural expression of their psychology and capabilities. They cannot stop trying to improve things, and their definition of improvement includes the complete transformation of reality itself. The Council found itself facing a unique dilemma. How do you protect galactic civilization from a species that is trying to help you? The solution that emerged from the Council's deliberations was unprecedented in its complexity and ambition. Rather than trying to stop human technological development, the Council would attempt to guide it. Rather than opposing human optimism and creativity, they would try to channel it toward goals that were compatible with galactic stability. The plan was called the Collaborative Integration Initiative, and it represented the most ambitious cooperative project in galactic history. Every major species would contribute their expertise, resources, and perspectives to working with humans on developing their technologies in ways that would benefit everyone while minimizing disruption to existing systems. But the plan's success depended on convincing humans to accept galactic partnership in their technological development efforts. And that meant someone had to go to terra firma and explain to Mac why his agricultural projects were a threat to galactic civilization. Mission to terra firma was led by a joint delegation representing every major species in the galaxy. The delegation included Ambassador Zentok, Dr. Kethver, Crystal Singer Veltara, Strategic Intelligence Coordinator Talvex, and representatives from dozens of other species. Their goal was to meet with Mac and convince him to accept galactic oversight and collaboration in his technological development efforts. Their challenge was explaining why his beneficial work needed to be controlled without discouraging his innovative spirit or triggering the protective instincts that had led to the Dog Wars. The meeting took place in the same conference room where Mac had first announced his intention to terraform a moon. Mac attended the meeting with the same casual confidence he brought to all his projects, apparently unaware that he was meeting with the largest diplomatic delegation in galactic history. "So," Mac said, settling into his chair with a cup of coffee, "Dr. Chun mentioned that you folks have some questions about the terraforming project. What can I help you with?" Ambassador Zentok, drawing on decades of diplomatic experience, began with the careful approach that had been developed through extensive planning and consultation. "Dr. McReynolds, the Galactic Council greatly appreciates your innovative work on atmospheric management and planetary engineering. Your achievements represent remarkable advances in agricultural and environmental science." Mac nodded politely. "Thank you. It's been an interesting project. More complex than I initially expected, but that's usually how it goes with new applications of existing technologies." Ambassador Zentok continued with the prepared diplomatic language. "The Council believes that your work has implications that extend beyond agricultural applications, and we would like to discuss the possibility of establishing collaborative frameworks for managing the development and implementation of your technologies." Mac's expression shifted to one of genuine confusion. "I'm not sure I understand. Are you asking to be involved in the terraforming project?" "In a sense, yes," Ambassador Zentok replied carefully. "The Council believes that your technologies could benefit from the expertise and perspectives of multiple species, and that collaborative development would produce better outcomes for everyone involved." Mac's confusion deepened. "But we already have collaborative development. Crystal Singer Veltara and Harmony Keeper Zender have been essential partners throughout the project. Dr. Kim has been providing botanical expertise. The Mokari Consortium has been contributing biological systems knowledge. The hegemony has been handling logistical coordination." He paused, studying the assembled delegation with growing bewilderment. "Are you saying that the current collaboration isn't sufficient? Are there other species that want to contribute to the project?" The delegation exchanged glances as they realized that Mac genuinely didn't understand why they were there. He wasn't being defensive or evasive. He was simply confused about why the largest diplomatic delegation in galactic history had come to discuss what he considered a routine agricultural project. Dr. Kethfer, recognizing that diplomatic language wasn't working, decided to try a more direct approach. Dr. McReynolds, your terraforming technologies have capabilities that extend far beyond agricultural applications. They could be used to reshape entire worlds, create new forms of environments, and fundamentally alter the nature of habitability throughout the galaxy. Mac nodded agreeably. Right, that's the point. Why should anyone have to settle for worlds that are just barely habitable, when we could create worlds that are perfectly optimized for whatever they need? But Dr. McReynolds, Dr. Kethfer continued, if you terraform thousands of worlds throughout the galaxy, it would fundamentally change the economic, political, and social structures that govern galactic civilization. Mac's expression cleared as understanding dawned. Oh, I see the concern. You're worried about the implementation logistics. That's a valid point. Coordinating large-scale terraforming efforts across multiple star systems would require extensive planning and resource management. He leaned forward with the enthusiasm he showed whenever he encountered an interesting problem. We'd need to establish priority systems for determining which worlds to terraform first, distribution networks for the biological systems, monitoring protocols for tracking the progress of terraforming projects, and coordination mechanisms for managing the increased habitable world capacity. Mac paused, his expression taking on the distant look that indicated he was beginning to work through the practical challenges of a new project. Actually, that's a really interesting problem. We'd essentially be managing the expansion of galactic habitable capacity by several orders of magnitude. That would require new approaches to resource allocation, population distribution, and probably completely new frameworks for territorial and governmental organization. The delegation stared at Mac in growing alarm as they realized that he was treating the complete transformation of galactic civilization as an interesting logistical challenge rather than a potential catastrophe. Strategic Intelligence Coordinator Talvex decided to try a different approach. Dr. McReynolds, your biological engineering technologies could have applications beyond terraforming. They could potentially be used for military purposes. Mac looked puzzled. Military purposes? I suppose the atmospheric modification systems could be used to create defensive barriers or to neutralize hostile environments, but why would anyone want to do that? The whole point of the technology is to create better living conditions for everyone. But the same technologies that create better living conditions could be used to create worse living conditions for enemy forces, Talvex explained. Mac's puzzlement deepened. But why would anyone want to create worse living conditions for anyone? That seems like a waste of perfectly good biological engineering capabilities. The conversation continued for several hours, with the delegation trying to explain why Mac's beneficial technologies were potentially dangerous, and Mac trying to understand why anyone would want to use technologies designed to help people for purposes that would hurt people. Finally, Crystal Singer Veltara, who had worked most closely with Mac and understood his psychology better than anyone else in the delegation, tried a different approach. Dr. McReynolds, she said, the Council is not concerned about your intentions or your goals. We know that you want to help everyone and create better conditions for all intelligent life. Our concern is that the changes your technologies could create would happen so quickly that galactic civilization might not be able to adapt to them. Mac nodded thoughtfully. That's a reasonable concern. Rapid changes can create adjustment difficulties even when the changes are beneficial. So you're suggesting that we need to manage the implementation timeline to allow for gradual adaptation, rather than sudden transformation? Exactly, Crystal Singer Veltara confirmed. We're proposing a collaborative approach where your technological development continues, but with coordination from multiple species to ensure that the implementation is managed in a way that allows everyone to adapt successfully. Mac's expression brightened as he finally understood what the delegation was proposing. So you want to help with the project management and implementation logistics. That makes sense. This is definitely a project that would benefit from multi-species expertise and coordination. He paused, grinning with the expression that had preceded every one of his most ambitious undertakings. Actually, if we're going to do this properly, we should probably expand the scope of the project. Instead of just terraforming individual worlds, we should develop integrated systems for managing galactic-scale environmental optimization. The delegation's relief at Mac's apparent cooperation turned to renewed alarm as they realized that he was interpreting their request for oversight as an invitation to make his projects even more ambitious. Dr. McReynolds, Ambassador Zentok said carefully, when you say galactic-scale environmental optimization, what exactly do you mean? Mac's grin widened. Well, if we're going to coordinate terraforming efforts across the galaxy, we might as well optimize the whole system. Instead of just creating individual habitable worlds, we could create integrated networks of worlds that are specifically designed to complement each other. He activated a holographic display that showed a theoretical map of the galaxy with interconnected networks of terraformed worlds. You could have agricultural worlds that are optimized for food production, research worlds that are optimized for scientific investigation, cultural worlds that are optimized for artistic and intellectual development, recreational worlds that are optimized for entertainment and relaxation. Mac's enthusiasm grew as he outlined his vision. And you could design the whole network so that the different worlds support each other, agricultural worlds providing food for research worlds developing new technologies for cultural worlds creating art, and entertainment for recreational worlds. The entire galaxy could become an integrated system optimized for the flourishing of all intelligent life. The delegation listened with growing horror as Mac casually described the complete redesign of galactic civilization as if it were a straightforward engineering project. But what terrified them most was the realization that Mac wasn't just describing theoretical possibilities. He was describing practical plans that he was clearly already beginning to develop. Dr. Kethfer made one final attempt to make Mac understand the implications of what he was proposing. Dr. McReynolds, you're describing changes that would transform every aspect of how galactic civilization functions. Such changes would affect billions of beings across hundreds of species. Right, Mac agreed. That's why it's important to do it properly. We need to make sure that the optimization systems take into account the needs and preferences of every species and every individual. It's a complex project, but that's what makes it interesting. The delegation's mission had been to convince Mac to accept oversight and moderation of his technological development. Instead, they had accidentally encouraged him to expand his goals to include the optimization of galactic civilization itself. The meeting ended with Mac enthusiastically agreeing to collaborate with the Galactic Council on what he was now calling the Universal Optimization Project. The delegation returned to the Council with the disturbing news that their attempt to moderate human ambitions had instead amplified them to galactic scale. But they also returned with something else. The realization that Mac's vision, terrifying, though it was in its scope and implications, was not actually threatening. Mac genuinely wanted to create the best possible outcomes for everyone, and his plans included safeguards and considerations for every species in the galaxy. The problem wasn't that Mac's goals were dangerous. It was that they were so ambitious that achieving them would require the complete transformation of galactic civilization. And Mac approached that transformation with the same casual confidence he brought to growing tomatoes in impossible conditions. Galactic Council's response to the delegation's report was to formally establish the Universal Optimization Project as the largest collaborative undertaking in galactic history. Every species would contribute their expertise, perspectives, and resources to working with Mac on developing systems for optimizing galactic civilization according to the needs and preferences of all intelligent life. But the most important aspect of the project was the establishment of new protocols for managing human enthusiasm and ambition. The protocols were designed not to suppress human creativity, but to ensure that human projects included adequate consideration for their implications and adequate time for other species to adapt to the changes they would create. The protocols included a formal requirement that any human project with galaxy-wide implications be preceded by the phrase, "Hold my beer," and followed by a mandatory waiting period during which other species could prepare for whatever impossible thing humans were about to accomplish. The Hold My Beer protocol became the most important regulatory framework in galactic law, not because it restricted human activity, but because it gave the rest of the galaxy time to brace themselves for the next impossible achievement that humans would casually describe as interesting or fun. But perhaps the most significant outcome of the Universal Optimization Project was the establishment of the human tradition of warning other species before attempting to do something that would change the fundamental nature of reality. Hold my beer became the phrase that every species in the galaxy learned to fear and anticipate. It was the warning that humans were about to solve a problem that everyone else considered impossible, and that the solution would probably require everyone else to reconsider their understanding of what was possible. The phrase became so closely associated with revolutionary human achievements that it was eventually incorporated into the Galactic Legal Code as a formal notice requirement. Any human who intended to attempt something that could fundamentally alter the nature of galactic civilization was legally required to announce their intentions by saying, "Hold my beer," and filing appropriate documentation with the Universal Optimization Council. But the most important thing the galaxy learned from Mac's projects was that humans didn't say, "Hold my beer," because they were reckless or because they didn't understand the risks involved. They said it because they had learned that most impossible things were just difficult things that nobody had figured out how to do yet, and they were very good at figuring out how to do difficult things. 10 years after the Universal Optimization Project began, the galaxy had been transformed in ways that no one could have imagined. Thousands of worlds had been terraformed using Mac's biological atmospheric management systems. Entire star systems had been optimized for specific purposes. The abundance of habitable worlds had eliminated resource conflicts and territorial disputes throughout the galaxy, but perhaps the most significant change was psychological. The galaxy had learned that limitations were often temporary, that impossible was often just another word for difficult, and that the most important question wasn't whether something could be done, but whether it should be done. The phrase, "Hold my beer," had become the unofficial motto of a galaxy that had learned to expect the impossible and to embrace changes that previous generations would have considered unthinkable. And at the center of it all was Mac, still working on what he called some interesting projects, still approaching galaxy-changing technologies as straightforward engineering challenges, and still somehow surprised that anyone found his achievements remarkable. "It's really just applied problem-solving," Mac explained to a gathering of galactic leaders who had come to Terra Firma to observe his latest project, a system for creating custom-designed pocket universes that could serve as backup habitats for endangered species. You identify a problem, you figure out what resources and technologies you have available to address it, You develop new resources and technologies for the parts you can't address with existing capabilities, and then you implement the solution. He paused, grinning with the expression that had become famous throughout the galaxy. The only thing that makes it seem complicated is that most people stop trying when they run into something that seems impossible. But impossible just means you haven't figured out how to do it yet. Mac's casual explanation of his approach to revolutionary innovation became the foundation for what educators throughout the galaxy called human standard problem solving. The idea that any challenge could be overcome with sufficient creativity, persistence, and willingness to develop new capabilities when existing capabilities proved insufficient. The approach spread throughout galactic civilization, leading to advances in every field of knowledge and technology. Species that had accepted limitations for thousands of years began questioning those limitations and developing new solutions to problems they had considered permanent. But perhaps the most important lesson that the galaxy learned from Mac and the human approach to problem solving was that the phrase "hold my beer" wasn't really about beer. It was about trust, confidence, and the willingness to attempt something that had never been done before. When humans said, "hold my beer," they weren't just asking someone to hold their drink. They were asking someone to believe in them, to support them, and to be ready to celebrate with them when they accomplished something that everyone else thought was impossible. And the galaxy had learned that when humans asked you to hold their beer, the best response was to hold it carefully, step back to a safe distance, and prepare to witness something that would change your understanding of what was possible. Because humans didn't just solve problems. They redefined what it meant for problems to be solvable. And in a galaxy where every species was learning to apply human standard optimism to their own challenges, that redefinition was the most valuable technology of all. The day every species learned why humans say, "hold my beer," was the day the galaxy learned that impossible was just another way of saying, "we haven't figured out how to do it yet." And once the galaxy learned that lesson, there was no going back to believing that anything was truly impossible ever again. Hey there, incredible humans. If this deep dive into why the galaxy learned to fear 3 simple words didn't leave you amazed at our species' beautiful, terrifying optimism, I don't know what will. This story shows that our greatest superpower isn't our technology or our strength. It's our refusal to accept that impossible is a permanent condition. Think about it. How many times in human history have we said, "hold my beer" in one form or another, and proceeded to do something that everyone said couldn't be done? From flying to the moon to splitting the atom to creating global communication networks, we've been proving impossibility wrong for our entire existence. I want to know, what's the most hold my beer moment you've witnessed or been part of? Drop a comment telling me about a time you or someone you know attempted something everyone said was impossible. And absolutely smash that like button if you're proud to be part of the species that treats impossible as a personal challenge. I've got another mind-blowing story coming up that explores what happens when humans discover the galaxy's most sacred meditation technique and accidentally turn enlightenment into a competitive sport. Trust me, you're going to want to see how we manage to weaponize inner peace. Click the card here or check out the whole playlist for more stories about why the universe should probably come with a warning label. Caution, contains humans who don't understand the word impossible. Until next time, remember, when humans say, "hold my beer," we're not being reckless. We're being optimistic. And apparently, optimism is the most dangerous force in the universe. See you in the next one, you beautiful, impossible, beer-holding legends.